Hi, friends. Recently, I completed Unity's Junior Programmer Learning Pathway and want to share what I got out of it. The reason that I chose to focus on C# and coding is because I'm developing a VR application by myself. It'll give me more control of what I want to do, and I think it's a great skill to have. With the increase of I have concerns that certain design functions will be automated. As a musician who lived through the time of MP3.com and Napster, I've experienced change I wasn't always prepared for and watched how certain skill sets can shift to become more and more undervalued. Because of this, I might be cautious now and feel like it's a good idea to have well rounded skills. Also, I love learning, so it works out. Another thing is that I see more full-time jobs for VR developer than VR designer, and I'm not sure if that's because other positions are handling the design, like a creative or art director, or perhaps the company isn't using that role until absolutely needed. Since startups require employees to take on many hats, it's possible that other roles are taking on design, or maybe it's something shared between roles. In larger companies, I tend to see designers use more, so it might just depend on the size of the operation. So I started the pathway on May 1st and finished the third weekend of June. So it was about 8 weeks and approximately 137 hours. I know the hours spent because I use Clockify to gauge my time for a lot of things. Time is something I highly value. Unity's website says that the completion time is 12 weeks with an average of 4 to 5 hours per week. I think that I put more time in because I had a steeper learning curve since I'm more of a designer, and I got obsessed with my final project. What I want to share with you is how my designer mindset helped me get through the pathway. If you're thinking about it, I'd like to encourage you to not be intimidated by coding and work on this pathway if you are interested. Process is important, not just in design, but in development. In my level design series, I go into how to map out a level from your user journey, and there is a lot of planning ahead of time before even drawing the map. It's similar with code. As I learned how everything was mapped together, it got so much easier to understand coding. Before, it just looked like a foreign language randomly strewn about, but when you think of it more like mapping a user journey, it falls into place. In the future, I'll consider drawing out what I want to do coding-wise and then execute. It also helped to have different scripts executing different functions of the game instead of one script trying to do all the things. This also made troubleshooting easier. I started to understand how to connect and disconnect functions from each other. It's like a modular synth. Let me show you what I mean. What scripts did I use and how did I put this all together? Let's see how this was built. Here we have the player, and on the player I have a player controller script. There are sound effects referenced as well as particle systems that you see off the lizard character. And then when the game is over, the game over panel is referenced here, so that gets toggled on. And then we also have a reference to the game manager. So let's take a look at the game manager really quick. The game manager is a little bit more extensive. This is where you're turning on and off different screens, like the title screen and then the game over screen. And this is where I have all of my buttons that are on the canvas. So let's just look at that super quick. If we see on the title screen, there's a start button. And that has a smaller start button script. And then I just have a reference here to the witch that's floating, and she gets turned off when the game starts, and then we see that other animation. So if we see in the scene here, I have 2 witches. This just makes it easy for me. And then I have a third one that gets turned on at the very end. That's when she's moving back and forth and just laughing. So let's go back over here again. And then we have the game over panel, which is turned off until the end of the game. And then I put the that button for, where is it, how to play, I put that just over here. And so that just gets toggled on and off, and there's a reference to the game manager. Let's go back to the game manager. I have the spawn manager on the same game object as the game manager. I think best practice would be to put the spawn manager on its own game object like I tried to do, but I noticed that for whatever reason, it wanted to be on the same object. And I just think there's something in my script or something that I did that this needed to be this way. And I'm also referencing from the spawn manager, the player controller script. So spawn manager, I did this separately because I have different prefabs that I spawned, and they did have some scripts that were specific to them. The obstacle script was kind of more generic, I would say, and it's there to set up for maybe future. At the very end of this process, I started using polymorphism, and I created this spawnable objects script, and then, used that concept to have, an obstacle script. But I didn't do too much with it. I just kind of wanted to see how that would work and do the setup of it. I also have spin objects, like a spin on the slime bubbles. I'm not sure how necessary that was, but it does give like this weird effect. Maybe it's a little bit too much, but anyway. And then of course we have power up with a power up script. The broom definitely had its own script and different things going on, because something I had to create was a boundary so that when the lizard was on the broom, it didn't leave the scene. I could have had that, but I didn't want that to be like an easy win for the player, and I just wanted it to be a trick and have the witch throw the lizard back into the scene. This was a challenge, not necessarily because of the scripting that went with it. I knew that things were happening, or like the lizard was getting destroyed because it would leave the scene with the broom. And there were just some issues with that. That's why I created this boundary for a lot of reasons. What I noticed is that I had everything I thought was working. I just couldn't figure out what was wrong with my script. Nothing was wrong with my script. It was because my boundary was not clicked as is kinematic. I think I had both unchecked. I needed to check this because it was getting pushed by the cauldron spawning and the other little slime bubbles that were getting spawned. And I didn't notice this until I was very tired. And then I decided to watch this scene and just see, okay, what is this really doing behind the scenes? And I noticed that it was getting pushed on a 90-degree angle, and then the lizard would jump on a broom and go right through. So it was actually an easier fix than I expected, but it did take a bit of troubleshooting to find out what that was. So then if we also look at the background, this has a move left script as well as the repeat background script, which is something I learned right from Unity's Junior Programmer Pathway. So I took that right from what I learned there. And is there anything else? The last thing I wanted to mention is scene audio. Normally in VR, I put all of my scene audio, even the sound effects, under a parent game object here. But in this case, like you saw earlier, I was putting all the sound effects on the player because that's what was getting triggered from the player a lot. So I just left that there, and I only have the music for the game here. This laugh I did not use, but it's still in the scene. I probably should have cleaned that up. So anyway, you may notice some things that are not perfectly cleaned up, but I tried to do my best because I wanted to quickly get this on GitHub for you so that you could check out these scripts in more detail if you wanted to. I'll link to my GitHub in the comments. But remember that I'm still new to coding, so I wouldn't follow what I'm doing exactly since this hasn't been checked by a pro. But you can still see my logic. If you take away one piece of advice from this video, it's this. Go slowly. At first, I wanted to go fast, but then made a lot of mistakes. I am not ashamed to say that I also used ChatGPT in tandem with Google when I ran into bugs and issues. That didn't make it easy. You still need to know how to code. ChatGPT was nice to work with, even if the answers were convoluted and flat out wrong. The conversation got me better at explaining what I wanted to do and made me go slow because the computer would give me mistakes and I'd have to check the code slowly and read it in detail. I use AI because I want to have an awareness of what's going on. It may exponentially surpass my intelligence in the near future, but by not having an awareness, I believe is worse. At one point, I got frustrated and ChatGPT told me to ask real human developers for help. I remembered this response to be snarkier than it appears here. That shows my humanity, and I'm grateful to have it. And finally, if you're interested, play my game. Link is in the description. It may not be VR, but as I was designing it, I still had the 3D space in mind. This is why the slime bubbles aren't restricted in their position like the player is. I was going to allow the player less restriction, but it got hard to control, so the lizard is just moving on the X-axis and jumping on the Y. Maybe that's weird, but I like that it's different. Sometimes it's good to break away from being perfect or following the rules, as long as you know what rules you're breaking. As I continue to work on my VR game, that'll be the true test to see if this new knowledge will help. Only time will tell. Whether or not you want to learn code as a designer, basic knowledge will help you understand the developers on your team and what's possible for your game as you design it. Let me know in the comments if you're learning to code, how it's going, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.